It looked like a very bad bug bite.
Oh, good imagery. Deadly flesh-eating bacteria.
It started with a headache. Nothing serious at first, just a dull ache behind the eyes that came and went without warning. Sarah, a 34-year-old mother of 2 young children, brushed it off as stress.
Cellulitis is a generic term that we use for infection of the skin. It can be caused for multiple reasons, and we give antibiotics, typically cellulitis.
Between long nights spent comforting her toddler, busy mornings preparing her older child for school, and the pressures of balancing household duties, headaches felt like an ordinary part of life. She told herself it was probably exhaustion, maybe dehydration, and nothing to worry about.
Tissue itself versus within the eyeball. If it was within the tissue around the eye, then we would give specific antibiotics for that area.
His eye is worse than ever.
It was very large.
But within a few days, the pain began to deepen. The headaches lingered longer, building into a steady throb that refused to fade. Then came the waves of nausea. Sarah found herself pushing food around on her plate, unable to eat. She blamed it on a stomach bug, but when the weakness set in, when her legs seemed to give way under her, when walking across the room left her breathless, she knew something was wrong. By the end of the week, she could hardly climb out of bed. Her husband, Mark, insisted on taking her to the hospital. There, a series of basic tests were ordered: blood work, urine samples, a physical exam. The doctors concluded it was likely viral, nothing alarming. They administered fluids, suggested rest, and discharged her with instructions to return if symptoms worsened. Sarah tried to accept the reassurance, but her body continued to betray her. Within days, the situation had turned alarming. The headaches were joined by sharp, stabbing pains radiating through her chest and down her arms. Her vision blurred unexpectedly, as though the world were slipping out of focus. At night, she would bolt upright, drenched in sweat, confused and disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Mark began keeping a constant vigil by her side, fearful of what might happen if he looked away. Finally, a neurologist was consulted. Unlike the earlier doctors, he suspected something more serious and ordered a brain scan. When the images appeared on the screen, the room fell silent. Nestled within Sarah's brain tissue were tiny foreign bodies, scattered like seeds in fertile ground. They were not tumors. They were alive. The medical team moved quickly. A biopsy was performed, and when the results returned from the lab, the unthinkable was confirmed: Taenia solium, the pork tapeworm. Sarah's brain was riddled with larval cysts. The condition had a name: neurocysticercosis. Rare in developed countries, but devastating when it appeared. Somehow, eggs had entered her body and traveled through her bloodstream, finally embedding themselves in the one organ she could not live without. The discovery left Sarah and her family reeling. How could this have happened? She was careful. She cooked meals thoroughly, washed produce, sanitized hands. She had never thought of herself as someone vulnerable to parasites. But parasites do not discriminate. They need no invitation. They enter silently, carried by contaminated food or water, slipping past the body's defenses until it is too late to stop them. Her doctors explained the process in grim detail. The microscopic eggs, likely ingested unknowingly, hatched within her intestines. From there, the larvae burrowed into her bloodstream, traveling until they found the rich, protective environment of her central nervous system. They grew slowly, almost invisibly, until the pressure on her brain began to distort her vision, upset her balance, and tear away at her health. The treatment plan was immediate but fraught with risk. Sarah was started on anti-parasitic medication designed to kill the larvae. At the same time, high doses of steroids were given to control the inflammation that would erupt as the parasites died. The danger was paradoxical. Killing the invaders could make her worse before it made her better. If the swelling grew too severe, she could suffer seizures, strokes, or even fall into a coma. For Mark and the children, the hospital became a second home. They sat by Sarah's bed as she endured the treatments, watching her fluctuate between moments of lucidity and hours of confusion. At times she seemed almost herself again, speaking softly about wanting to go home, about missing the ordinary chaos of family life. At other times she drifted away, eyes glassy, trapped in a fog created by her own body fighting against its invaders. The experience was terrifying, but it also revealed a chilling truth. Sarah was not alone. Across the world, millions live with parasitic infections, many of them undiagnosed. In regions where sanitation is poor, neurocysticercosis is one of the leading causes of epilepsy. Even in modern hospitals, doctors sometimes overlook it, mistaking symptoms for more common ailments until scans reveal the reality. The silence of the disease makes it more dangerous. It hides, it waits, and it strikes only when its hold is strong. Sarah's case became a teaching point for the hospital. Specialists discussed it in hushed tones in hallways, amazed that something so rare had appeared in their own community. For the family, though, it was no academic curiosity. It was a battle for survival. Every morning, Mark held Sarah's hand, whispering that she would get through this, that their children were waiting for her, that she was stronger than the thing inside her. Weeks passed. Gradually, the medications began to take effect. The cysts shrank, the swelling lessened, and Sarah regained fragments of strength. But the recovery was not instant. The damage caused by the larva could not be erased overnight. Neurologists warned her that seizures might still occur, that headaches could linger for years, and that vision problems might remain permanent. It was a sobering reality. Surviving the infection was only the beginning. Yet Sarah did survive. The ordeal left her body scarred and her mind forever marked by the knowledge of how fragile safety truly is. She returned home eventually, thinner and weaker than before, but grateful to hold her children again. The small comforts of daily life, the sound of laughter in the kitchen, the warmth of her husband's embrace, felt like gifts she might once have overlooked. Her story spread quietly among friends and neighbors, a reminder that danger sometimes hides in the most ordinary places. It became a lesson in vigilance, in understanding that the invisible world of microbes and parasites operates alongside our own, indifferent to habits or routines. Sarah's life was changed forever, but she carried forward with resilience. What had begun as a dull headache behind the eyes became a fight for survival against an unseen invader. And while the scars of that battle would remain, so too would her strength, her determination, and her unwavering will to live. Thousands of miles away in India, a young man named Rakesh walked into the emergency ward of a crowded hospital, his body already bearing the marks of something sinister. His abdomen was visibly swollen, the skin stretched tight across his stomach. He was exhausted, unable to walk more than a few steps without leaning on a wall for support. In just 2 months, he had lost nearly 10 kilograms, his frame reduced to frailty, and his once healthy skin had faded to a pale, almost gray shade. When the doctors examined him, their first thoughts were ordinary ones. In rural India, such symptoms often point toward liver disease, hepatitis, or tuberculosis, conditions sadly familiar to physicians there. But when they pressed gently on his abdomen, Rakesh winced in sharp pain, his face contorting with discomfort. Something was wrong, something deeper than what the doctors had first assumed. To get answers, they ordered an ultrasound. What appeared on the screen shocked even the experienced medical staff. There, nestled against his liver, was a large fluid-filled sac. At first glance it looked like a tumor, but closer analysis revealed its true identity, a hydatid cyst. This was no ordinary growth, but the work of Echinococcus granulosus, a parasitic tapeworm that, in its adult form, lives inside the intestines of dogs. The doctors explained to Rakesh and his family how this invasion had begun. At some point in the past, months, perhaps even years earlier, Rakesh had likely eaten vegetables grown in fields where dog feces had contaminated the soil. Invisible eggs from the parasite had clung to the plants. When he consumed them, the eggs hatched inside his intestines, releasing larvae that silently migrated through his bloodstream. One of them had found its way to his liver and, without detection, had begun to form a cyst. Slowly, quietly, it expanded over time until it reached the size of a grapefruit. This discovery was not just disturbing, it was dangerous. Hydatid cysts are fragile. If the cyst ruptures inside the body, it can unleash thousands of larvae at once, spreading the infection throughout multiple organs. Worse, the sudden release of cyst fluid can trigger an immediate and deadly allergic reaction known as anaphylactic shock. For Rakesh, the cyst had become a ticking time bomb, one wrong movement away from catastrophe. The doctors prepared for surgery. The operating theater was tense as the medical team worked with painstaking precision. Every cut, every movement had to be deliberate, for if the cyst burst, the outcome could be fatal. Hours passed while surgeons navigated the delicate procedure, carefully isolating and removing the sac intact. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the surgery concluded successfully. The hydatid cyst was gone, and Rakesh was alive. But his journey was far from over. Recovery would require months of antiparasitic medication to ensure no remaining larvae could survive and regrow. His body had hosted an invader for years, one that had stolen his strength while he lived each day unaware. The experience left him weak, but grateful. He had survived a hidden enemy that could have taken everything. Meanwhile, back in the United States, another story of parasitic horror was unfolding, though in a very different way. Matt, a college student, had recently returned from an adventurous camping trip in South America. The trip had been filled with excitement. Jungle treks, river crossings, nights spent under starlit skies. But days after his return, he noticed something unusual, a small red bump on his arm that looked like a simple bug bite. At first, Matt ignored it. Bug bites were nothing new, and he assumed it would heal in a few days. But the bump grew larger, turning into a painful boil. What alarmed him most was the sensation. The skin seemed to throb from within, and occasionally, he swore, he felt something moving under the surface. When he pressed the area, it pulsed back. His growing fear drove him to seek medical help. At the clinic, doctors quickly identified the culprit, a botfly larva. Botflies are notorious in parts of Central and South America. The female botfly lays its eggs on the bodies of mosquitoes and other insects. When those insects bite humans, the warmth of the skin triggers the eggs to hatch, releasing larvae that burrow into the flesh. There they remain, feeding on living tissue, growing fatter day by day while their human host suffers. For Matt, the realization was nauseating. The boil on his arm was not an infection but a living creature. Under local anesthesia, the doctors performed a minor surgical extraction. With careful hands, they squeezed and pulled until the thick, squirming worm was removed, alive and writhing, from beneath his skin. The sight of it left Matt shaken. What he thought had been a harmless bite had nearly turned into a grotesque infestation. Though his wound healed quickly, the memory stayed with him far longer. The knowledge that something had been crawling under his skin, using his body as its shelter and food, was a nightmare he would never forget. These cases, Rakesh in India with his hydatid cyst, and Matt in the United States with his botfly larva, are stark reminders of the unseen dangers that lurk in everyday life. Parasites are ancient survivors. They do not announce themselves with loud symptoms at first. They creep in silently, hitching rides on food, water, or even insects, and take up residence in human bodies without permission. By the time their presence is revealed, they may already have caused immense damage. For those who experience it, the shock is not only physical, but deeply psychological. To realize that one's own body has become home to a creature that feeds, grows, and thrives inside is to face a terror unlike any other. These silent invaders rob health, drain strength, and sometimes steal years of life before being uncovered. All three of these people, Camilla with her hookworms, Rakesh with his hydated cyst, and Matt with his botfly, shared one chilling truth. None of them knew they were hosts until it was too late. The scariest thing about parasites is not simply that they live inside us. It is the way they hide in silence, often for weeks, months, or even years, before making their presence known. They are intruders that leave no obvious trace at first, biding their time while quietly draining strength, altering health, and sometimes even reshaping lives. By the time symptoms appear, the damage has already begun, and the victim is left to face a horror that seems almost unreal, a living organism feeding from within. In Brazil, a young girl named Camila experienced this terror. She was a bright child, energetic and curious, but one summer her health began to shift in ways her family could not understand. She lost weight quickly, though her appetite seemed unchanged. She felt dizzy during the day, often clutching walls or desks for balance. Most peculiar of all, she developed an overwhelming craving for soil and ice, substances no child should long to eat. Her mother, believing it was a simple case of anemia, bought iron supplements and encouraged her daughter to take them daily. Yet Camilla's condition did not improve. Her energy plummeted further, leaving her too tired to keep up with her classmates. Teachers noticed she would put her head down on her desk or stumble in the middle of activities. One day, she collapsed on the schoolyard, fainting in front of horrified children and staff. That moment forced her family to seek urgent medical attention. At the hospital, a stool test revealed the hidden truth: Camilla was infested with Ancylostoma duodenale, better known as hookworm. The diagnosis shocked her family. Each worm measured only a few millimeters, nearly invisible to the naked eye, yet inside her intestines there were hundreds. They had latched onto the lining of her small intestine, draining her blood drop by drop. Over time, they had left her iron levels dangerously low, starving her body of the oxygen it needed to thrive. Doctors explained how the infection had likely begun. In rural Brazil, it is common for children to play barefoot outdoors. Somewhere, Camilla must have walked across contaminated soil, unaware that larvae were lying in wait. They entered her body not through her mouth, but directly through the skin of her feet. From there, they traveled through her bloodstream, moved into her lungs, and eventually reached her digestive system. It was a silent invasion, one her family could not have seen coming. Treatment was started with anti-parasitic medication, but recovery was slow. The worms had not only weakened her immune system, but had also stunted her growth. Her bones were fragile, her body thin, and her energy still unreliable. Though the parasites were killed, the months of lost nutrients meant the damage lingered. For Camilla, the infection had not just stolen vitamins and minerals. It had robbed her of precious time in childhood, leaving scars that would take years to fade. But Brazil is not the only place where parasites haunt lives. In Africa, in remote villages far from modern medical access, another nightmare unfolds in the form of the guinea worm. Though nearly eradicated thanks to international health campaigns, the parasite still emerges in isolated communities. One boy, no older than 10, was discovered with a worm coiled painfully within his leg. The guinea worm begins its journey invisibly. When a person drinks stagnant water contaminated with tiny water fleas carrying the larvae, the infection begins. Inside the stomach, the larvae are released, burrowing through tissues and growing silently for months. For nearly a year, there are no signs. Then, when the worm has reached its full length, sometimes close to a meter, it creates a blister on the skin. From that wound, it begins to emerge slowly, burning its way outward. The pain is excruciating, described as fire under the flesh. What makes this parasite particularly cruel is the lack of medical solutions. There is no cure, no pill, no vaccine. The only treatment is ancient and brutal. Winding the worm out of the body manually, a few centimeters at a time, each day, until the creature is fully extracted. This process can take weeks and demands immense endurance, as the worm is alive and resists removal. For the boy in Africa, every step was agony until the parasite was finally gone. In another part of the world, the horror of parasites took an even stranger form. A man in Thailand awoke one morning to sudden blindness in his left eye. He described the sensation as if a curtain had dropped over his vision overnight. Alarmed, he rushed to an ophthalmologist. What the doctors discovered was enough to unsettle even the most experienced. Inside his eye socket, a worm was alive and moving. The doctors identified it as loa, the African eye worm. This parasite is known for traveling under the skin, visible as a shifting lump that slides beneath the surface. But in this man's case, it had ventured farther, crawling into his eye and positioning itself behind the retina. It could actually be seen squirming, a thin, pale thread-like shape darting across the field of vision. Though rare, loa is carried by the bite of certain flies in West and Central Africa. Once inside, it roams through the human body at will, traveling under the skin or into tissues. For this patient, the invasion had reached one of the most sensitive and horrifying places possible, the eye. Doctors were forced to surgically remove the worm, careful not to cause further blindness. Even then, the memory of watching a living creature move within his own eye would haunt him forever. These stories reveal an unsettling truth about parasites. They are not monsters of folklore or creatures confined to distant jungles. They are real, adaptable, and persistent. They slip into human bodies unnoticed and thrive in silence, feeding, growing, and sometimes even reshaping the lives of those they inhabit. The scariest thing is not only what they do once discovered, but how long they manage to stay hidden, living in plain sight within the most private chambers of our bodies. Not all parasites announce themselves with dramatic swelling, sudden pain, or visible signs of invasion. Some are far more insidious, operating in silence while quietly altering the very fabric of their host's mind and body. These are the parasites that unsettle doctors most, not because they are the deadliest, but because they can rewrite behavior, change identity, and leave behind scars that no surgery can erase. In France, one such case shocked both the medical community and the man's family. He was in his late 30s, a father, and by all accounts an ordinary man with no history of mental illness. Then, without warning, his personality shifted. He grew impulsive, snapping at friends and loved ones. He began to drive recklessly, ignoring speed limits and weaving dangerously through traffic. Aggression and irritability seemed to dominate him. Those who knew him best said it was as if his true self had been pushed aside by something darker. Doctors suspected a neurological condition, perhaps a brain tumor, perhaps early-onset dementia, or even a stroke. Yet brain scans revealed nothing. No visible damage, no lesions, no structural abnormalities. With each test returning clean, confusion deepened. Finally, specialists ordered a screen for Toxoplasma gondii, a parasite often associated with cats. The results were positive. The parasite was lodged deep within his brain. Toxoplasma gondii is one of the most widespread parasites in the world, often contracted from undercooked meat or from handling cat feces. In most healthy people, it lies dormant, causing no outward illness. But research has revealed a chilling truth. When it reaches the brain, it can interfere with neurotransmitters, particularly dopamine. Some studies even suggest it reduces fear responses, making infected individuals more likely to take risks, get into accidents, or show heightened aggression. For the man in France, the parasite had not made him physically ill. It had altered his very behavior. He was started on treatment, but the effects of toxoplasma are not always reversible. Even after therapy, those close to him said he was never entirely the same. A microscopic organism had rewritten fragments of his personality, leaving behind no scar, no wound, nothing visible. Just a man forever changed. On the other side of the world, in Australia, A case emerged that would make global headlines. A middle-aged woman came to doctors complaining of strange symptoms, memory loss, depression, and persistent stomach pain. At first, her symptoms seemed scattered, pointing to either gastrointestinal problems or perhaps a psychological condition. She had recently visited rural farmland and had eaten wild greens she had foraged herself. Doctors suspected food poisoning, stress, or anxiety. But an MRI scan revealed something no one expected. A thin, wriggling structure was visible inside her brain. It was alive. Surgeons prepared for an extraordinary operation. When they carefully opened her skull and peered into the tissue, they saw it. A long, pale worm still moving. The parasite was identified as Scariest robertsi, a roundworm typically found in pythons. This was the first documented human case in medical history. Somehow, eggs from the parasite had entered her body, likely through contaminated vegetation. From her stomach, the larvae had migrated into her bloodstream and then into her brain, where one had grown into a living worm. Doctors delicately extracted the parasite, still writhing, from her brain tissue. The woman survived, but survival was not the end of the ordeal. The knowledge that a snake parasite had been alive inside her head was a trauma she would carry for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, in Mexico, another story unfolded, this one stretching across years of misdiagnosis and suffering. A middle-aged man had been plagued by seizures since his youth. At different times, doctors had told him he was epileptic, anxious, or suffering from psychosomatic illness. Medications dulled some of his symptoms but never cured them. But after draining the fluid, they discovered dozens of tiny worms squirming in the fluid. Filarial worms passed on by blackflies. The disease was onchocerciasis, also known as river blindness. These parasites migrate through the skin, and over time, some enter the eyes, causing irreversible blindness. The boy had already lost partial vision in one eye. Parasites are not just insects or creatures of horror films. They are real. They adapt. They enter without sound, without warning. They can live in the blood, under the skin, in the eyes, brain, lungs, or muscles. They cross borders, ignore hygiene, and survive through years of misdiagnosis. Some kill, some disable. Others simply stay hidden, controlling and feeding without ever revealing themselves. These stories are not fiction. They are medical records. They are hospital logs. They are autopsy findings. And the most disturbing truth of all, right now, at this moment, someone else, somewhere, is already infected. But they do not know it yet.